The wind howled through the canyon like a wounded animal, carrying with it the first bitter taste of winter. Jed Hartley pulled his collar higher against his weathered neck, squinting through the swirling dust at the endless stretch of rocky plateau before him. The land here was unforgiving, all sharp edges and broken promises, much like the life he'd carved out for himself in the years since Martha died. 3 winters had passed since that black day when the Colton gang rode through, leaving nothing but blood and ashes in their wake. 3 winters of waking to an empty bed, of coffee for one, of conversations with horses who couldn't talk back. The neighbors in Copper Creek, 20 miles east, had taken to calling him the Ghost of Stone Ridge. And maybe they weren't wrong. A ghost was all he felt like most days, something caught between living and dying, never quite managing either. His ranch sat nestled against a wall of red rock, protected from the worst of the wind but exposed enough to see trouble coming from miles off. It wasn't much, a sturdy cabin he'd built with his own hands, a barn that leaned slightly to the west, and a corral where his 3 horses waited out the storms. The place had been meant for 2, maybe more in time, but now it housed only shadows and memories. Jed finished checking the fence line as darkness crept across the plateau. The cattle were secure, what few he had left after selling most of the herd last spring. He didn't need much these days, just enough to keep busy, to keep his hands working so his mind wouldn't wander to places better left alone. The physical labor was a blessing. It wore him down enough that sleep sometimes came without dreams. The first drops of freezing rain began to fall as he headed back toward the cabin. By the time he reached the porch, it had turned into a proper storm, the kind that drove sensible folk indoors and made the foolish wish they'd never left home. He was shaking the water from his hat when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. Hoofbeats, slow and uneven, like a tired horse carrying a tired rider. Jed's hand moved instinctively to the colt at his hip. Visitors were rare out here, and the ones who came usually brought trouble. He stepped back into the shadows of the porch, watching the trail that wound up from the valley below. The horse that emerged from the storm was a sorry sight, a bay mare, head hanging low, steam rising from her flanks. The rider wasn't much better, hunched forward in the saddle, barely seeming to stay mounted. It wasn't until they drew closer that Jed realized the rider was a woman. She wore a traveling dress, now soaked through and clinging to her frame, and a cloak that had probably been fine once but now hung in tatters. Her hat had lost its fight with the wind, leaving her dark hair plastered against her face. But it was her eyes that caught him when she finally looked up, green as spring grass and burning with something fierce, despite the exhaustion written across her features. "Please," she called out, her voice barely carrying over the storm. "I need shelter for the night." Jed stayed where he was, torn between the instinct to help and the harder lesson that helping strangers often led to regret. "Nearest town's 20 miles east," he said finally. "Copper Creek. They've got a hotel. I won't make it 20 miles. She straightened in the saddle, and despite the rain streaming down her face, there was steel in her spine. "I'm not asking for charity. I can pay or work for my keep. Just one night." Something in the way she held herself, proud even in desperation, stirred a memory Jed quickly pushed down. He looked at the mare, saw the way she favored her left front leg, noticed the woman's hands trembling on the reins. One night, what harm could one night do? "Stables around back," he said gruffly. "See to your horse first." Relief flickered across her features, quickly hidden. She slid from the saddle with more grace than he'd expected, though she had to grab the mare's mane to steady herself. "Thank you." Jed watched her lead the horse toward the stable, noting the way she moved, careful, like someone carrying hidden injuries or hidden weapons. His hand stayed near his gun as he followed. In the stable's dim light, she worked with practiced efficiency despite her obvious fatigue. Her hands were gentle with the mare, checking each hoof, rubbing down the wet coat. These weren't the soft hands of a lady who'd never worked. When she reached for the heavy saddle, Jed stepped forward. "I'll get that." She paused, then stepped back with a nod. As he lifted the saddle, he felt the weight of it, heavier than it should be. His eyes found hers in the lamplight. A question forming, but she looked away. "She's not mine," the woman said quietly. "Bought her in Millfield with the last of my money. She's carried me well, considering." "Where you headed?" "North. I have family near the border." The hesitation was slight, but Jed caught it. After 3 years of solitude, he'd gotten good at hearing what people didn't say. He finished with the mare in silence, then led the way to the cabin. The woman followed, her boots squelching in the mud. At the door, she paused. "I'm Rachel Carter," she said, extending a hand like a man would. Jed looked at the offered hand for a moment before taking it briefly. Jed Hartley. Inside. The cabin was sparse but clean. A main room with a stone fireplace. A small table with 2 chairs, one dusty from disuse, and a kitchen area along one wall. A single door led to what had been the bedroom. Jed had taken to sleeping on a bedroll by the fire most nights anyway. Rachel stood just inside the door, dripping steadily, taking in the space with those sharp green eyes. Whatever she saw seemed to satisfy her, or maybe she was just too tired to care. "There's a room through there," Jed said, gesturing to the door. "You can have it for tonight. I'll sleep out here." "I don't want to put you out." "You're not." His tone ended the discussion. He moved to the fireplace, adding logs to the dying embers. "Get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death. There might be something dry in the trunk. Haven't looked in a while." He kept his back to her, but he heard her move toward the bedroom, heard the door open and close. His hand stilled on the poker. Martha's clothes were in that trunk. 3 years, and he'd never been able to bring himself to get rid of them. The fire caught, flames dancing up to chase the shadows. Jed busied himself heating water for coffee, pulling out hardtack and dried beef from his stores. It wasn't much, but it would fill a stomach. He was slicing the beef when he heard it, soft, muffled, but unmistakable. The sound of a woman crying. She was trying to be quiet about it, probably thought the storm would cover the sound, but the cabin was small, and Jed had spent too many nights listening to his own grief to mistake someone else's. He stood there, knife in hand, caught between the urge to offer comfort and the knowledge that sometimes grief needed its privacy. After a moment, he went back to preparing the simple meal. Whatever had driven Rachel Carter out into a storm, whatever she was running from or toward, it wasn't his business. One night, come morning, she'd be gone, and his life would return to its careful emptiness. The bedroom door opened eventually, and Rachel emerged wearing a plain blue dress that hung loose on her frame. Martha had been taller, fuller figured. The sight of it hit him unexpectedly, a fist to the gut that left him breathless. "Thank you," Rachel said quietly, not quite meeting his eyes. "I'll wash my things tonight. Be gone first light. Storm might not break by then. Then I'll leave when it does." She moved to the fire, holding her hands out to the warmth. In the flickering light, he could see the exhaustion etched into her features, the kind that went bone deep. "I won't impose longer than necessary." Jed set the food on the table, poured 2 cups of coffee. "Eat." She sat carefully, as if expecting the chair to be pulled away. The first sip of coffee made her close her eyes, and for just a moment, the tension in her shoulders eased. They ate in silence, the storm rattling the windows, the fire popping occasionally. "You lived here long?" she asked finally. "Built the place 8 years back. It's solid work." Her fingers traced a knot in the wooden table. "Peaceful. That's one word for it." She looked up at that, studying him with those unsettling green eyes. "What word would you use?" "Empty, lonely, haunted." "Quiet," he said instead. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Yes, I suppose it is that." They lapsed back into silence. When the meal was finished, Rachel insisted on cleaning up despite his protests. She moved around his space carefully, putting things back exactly where she'd found them. When she was done, she returned to stand by the fire. "I should tell you," she began, then stopped, seeming to reconsider. If anyone comes asking, I'd be grateful if you hadn't seen me. Jed leaned back in his chair. You bring trouble to my door? Not if I can help it. She met his gaze steadily. But I won't lie and say it's not possible. He should send her back out into the storm. Should saddle up and take her to Copper Creek himself. Leave her at the hotel and wash his hands of whatever this was. That's what the smart man would do. The safe man. But looking at her standing there in Martha's dress, spine straight despite everything weighing on her, he found himself nodding. Get some rest. Morning'll come soon enough. The relief that flashed across her face was quickly hidden. She turned toward the bedroom, paused at the door. Mr. Hartley? Thank you for the kindness. It's not kindness, he said roughly. Just common decency. These days, there's not much difference. After she closed the door, Jed sat staring at the fire for a long time. He thought about Martha, about the dreams they'd shared for this place. Children laughing in the yard, crops growing in the valley, a life full of purpose and love. All of it burned away in a single afternoon of violence. He'd made his peace with the emptiness, or so he'd told himself. Built walls around what was left of his heart, thick enough that nothing could breach them. He'd stopped going to town except when absolutely necessary, stopped accepting dinner invitations from well-meaning neighbors, stopped pretending he was anything more than a ghost haunting his own life. But now there was a woman in his house, wearing his dead wife's clothes, carrying secrets that might bring danger to his door. And for the first time in 3 years, the cabin didn't feel quite so empty. Jed spread his bedroll by the fire, checked that his rifle was within reach. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside, the cabin was warm and quiet. From the bedroom, he thought he heard Rachel crying again, soft and hopeless. He turned his back to the door, pulled his hat down over his eyes, and tried not to remember another night, another storm. When he'd held Martha, she cried over news from the doctor that there'd be no children coming. Tried not to think about how different tears could sound and still carry the same weight of sorrow. One night, he reminded himself. Come morning, she'd be gone, but as sleep finally claimed him, Jed found himself hoping the storm would last a little longer. The storm broke sometime before dawn, leaving behind a world wrapped in crystalline silence. Jed woke to find frost painting patterns on the windows and his breath misting in the cold air. The fire had died to embers, and his joints protested as he rose from the hard floor. He moved quietly, rebuilding the fire, setting coffee to boil. Through the window, he could see Rachel's mare in the corral, favoring that front leg even more than she had the night before. The animal would need tending if she was going to carry her rider any further. The bedroom door remained closed. Jed went about his morning routine, checking the other horses, breaking ice on the water trough, surveying the damage from the storm. A section of fence had come down in the wind, and one of the barn doors hung askew. Work that needed doing, but nothing urgent. When he returned to the cabin, Rachel was up, standing at the stove with a purposeful air that surprised him. She'd pinned her hair back, and Martha's dress had been adjusted somehow to fit better. The smell of biscuits filled the air. Hope you don't mind, she said without turning around. Found flour and lard in your pantry. Figured it was the least I could do. Don't recall asking for payment. No. She glanced over her shoulder, a hint of stubbornness in the set of her jaw. But I don't take charity. Mr. Hartley. Never have. The biscuits were better than anything Jed had managed in 3 years of bachelor cooking. They ate in relative quiet, but it was a different silence than the night before, less wary, more companionable. When they finished, Rachel stood to clear the table. Your mare's lame, Jed said abruptly. That leg won't carry you 20 miles. Rachel's hand stilled on the plates. How bad? Needs rest. Week, maybe 2. I can't stay here 2 weeks. Didn't say you could. He softened his tone slightly. But pushing her now means she won't carry you anywhere. Ever again. Rachel set the plates down carefully, gripping the edge of the table. For a moment, her composed mask slipped, showing the desperation underneath. Then I'll walk. In those boots, through this terrain, you wouldn't make 5 miles. That's my concern, not yours. It becomes mine when I find your frozen body on my land come spring." She whirled to face him, green eyes flashing. "What would you have me do then? I can't stay, and I can't go. You've made it clear you don't want me here." "I said no such thing. You didn't have to." The fire went out of her as quickly as it had come. "I know what I am. An intrusion. A reminder of things better forgotten. I saw how you looked at this dress." Jed stood slowly, moved to the window. The morning sun was painting the red rocks gold, a sight that used to make Martha catch her breath. "Work for your keep," he said finally. "Until the mare heals, I've got winter preparations to finish, and an extra pair of hands wouldn't go amiss. I don't need your pity." "Good, because I'm not offering any." He turned to face her. "This is a business arrangement. Work for room and board. Once your horse is sound, you move on. We both get what we need, nothing more." Rachel studied him for a long moment, seeming to weigh his words against some internal scale. "All right," she said at last. "What needs doing?" They started with the fence. Rachel traded Martha's dress for her own clothes, now dry but still showing the wear of hard travel. She worked without complaint, holding posts steady while Jed hammered, hauling water for the horses, gathering the eggs from the few chickens that scratched around the yard. She was stronger than she looked, and more capable than most women, or men, he'd known. When he showed her how to mend the harness, she picked it up quickly, her fingers deft with the heavy needles. She knew her way around horses, speaking to them in low, soothing tones that had even his ornery gelding eating from her hand. "You grew up on a ranch?" he asked during a break, passing her the water jug. "No." She wiped sweat from her brow despite the cold. "My husband was a trapper. Spent most of our marriage in camps from here to the Rockies. You learn or you don't survive." "Was." "Fever took him 2 summers back." Her tone was matter-of-fact, but Jed caught the tightness around her eyes. "His family blamed me. Said I should have done more. Gotten him to a doctor sooner. Never mind, we were 3 days from the nearest town." She didn't elaborate, and Jed didn't push. They went back to work, falling into a rhythm that felt strangely natural. By midday, they'd repaired the fence and straightened the barn door. Rachel had insisted on mucking out stalls while he tended to her mare's leg, wrapping it carefully with strips of cloth. That evening, she cooked again, beans and cornbread this time, with wild onions she'd spotted growing near the creek. They ate as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of fire. "You're from back east," Jed said. It wasn't a question. Her accent gave her away, though it had been worn down by years in the territories. "Philadelphia, originally. Seems like another lifetime." She pushed a bean around her plate. "My parents had plans for me. Good marriage, proper house, children to carry on the family name. I disappointed them greatly when I ran off with Thomas. The trapper," she nodded. "He came through selling furs, stayed at my father's hotel. I was 17, thought I knew everything about love and life." A rueful smile touched her lips. "Turns out I knew nothing about either. Most of us don't, at that age." "You married young?" The question caught him off guard. He'd been the one pressing for information. Hadn't expected her to turn it around. 22, met Martha at a barn raising. She was trying to lift a beam twice her size, too stubborn to ask for help. The memory came easier than usual, without the usual stab of pain. Should have known then what I was in for. Rachel smiled. A real one this time. The stubborn ones usually make the best partners. That they do. They lapsed into silence. But again, it was comfortable. When Rachel rose to clear the table, Jed found himself helping. Their movements coordinated without discussion. It was such a simple thing, sharing space with another person, but it stirred something in him he'd thought long dead. That night, Rachel disappeared into the bedroom earlier, claiming exhaustion. Jed sat by the fire, ostensibly oiling his rifle, but mostly trying not to think about how the cabin felt different with her in it. Fuller, somehow. Alive in a way it hadn't been since. From the bedroom came a sound that made him freeze. Not crying this time, but a gasp of fear. followed by muttered words he couldn't make out. Nightmare, most likely. He'd had his share of those. The sounds continued, growing more distressed. Jed stood, hesitated, then moved to the bedroom door. Mrs. Carter? A crash from inside, like something falling. Without thinking, he pushed open the door. Rachel was sitting up in bed, eyes wide but unfocused, one hand pressed to her throat. The water pitcher lay broken on the floor. In the moonlight streaming through the window, he could see the terror on her face. "Just a dream," he said softly, staying in the doorway. "You're safe." She blinked, awareness returning slowly. When she saw him, she pulled the blanket higher, though she was fully dressed. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to wake." "You didn't." He grabbed a cloth from the washstand, crouched to clean up the broken pitcher. "Happens to everyone out here. The silence gets into your dreams sometimes." It wasn't the silence. Her voice was barely above a whisper. It was someone finding me. Jed continued cleaning, giving her time to compose herself. When he'd gathered the larger pieces, he straightened. This someone have a name. Rachel drew her knees up, making herself smaller. "Samuel Morrison. He owns half of Bentwood, thinks that entitles him to own everything else too. After Thomas died, he started coming around. Said a woman alone needed protection, especially one with no family to speak for her. And you disagreed. I told him I'd rather bed down with rattlesnakes." A ghost of her earlier fire returned. He didn't take kindly to the rejection, started making life difficult. Suddenly, no one would buy my furs. The boarding house wouldn't rent to me. The general store was always out of what I needed. Jed knew the type. Men who used their wealth like a weapon, who saw everything as property to be acquired. "So, you left. In the middle of the night like a thief. Took what I could carry and ran." She laughed bitterly. "Some would say I should have just accepted it. He's not a bad-looking man, has money, could have given me a comfortable life. But I've been owned once already. When Thomas was alive, I was his wife, his helper, his property according to law. I won't be that again." The fierce independence in her voice struck a chord in Jed. He thought of Martha, how she'd insisted on keeping her own name after they married, much to her family's scandal. How she'd worked beside him as an equal, never behind. "Get some rest," he said, moving toward the door. "I'll be right outside if you need anything." "Mr. Hartley?" He paused, looked back. "Thank you for understanding." He nodded, closed the door behind him. But sleep was a long time coming, and when it did, his own dreams were restless. He saw Martha in the doorway of their cabin, smiling and waving. But when he got closer, it was Rachel's green eyes looking out from Martha's face, and behind her, shadows shaped like men with guns. The next days fell into a pattern. Rachel rose early, often before Jed, and set to whatever work needed doing without being asked. She patched his worn shirts, organized the chaos of his tool shed, even started a small kitchen garden using seeds she'd had tucked in her saddlebags. "Optimistic, aren't you?" Jed said, watching her carefully place stones around the planted area to hold warmth. "Hardy varieties," she replied, patting the soil. "They'll sprout before the ground freezes, give you greens through early winter if you tend them." The assumption that he'd tend anything she planted stuck with him, as did the way she hummed while she worked. Not any tune he recognized, just a meandering melody that seemed to lighten the air around her. He caught himself listening for it, found the silence heavier when she stopped. One evening, after a day spent repairing the chicken coop, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Rachel had found his store of tobacco and rolled 2 cigarettes with practiced ease. "Thomas taught me," she said, catching his surprised look. "Said a woman should know all the same skills as a man, just in case. Smart man. In some ways." She took a long draw, exhaled slowly. "In others, well, he's dead and I'm running, so perhaps not so smart after all." "How'd it happen? The fever?" "Bad water. We think. Found a stream that looked clean enough, but..." She shrugged. "He was burning up within hours. I did everything I knew. Willow bark tea, cold compresses. Even tried some Indian remedies a Shoshone woman had taught me. Nothing worked. He was gone in 3 days. I'm sorry. So am I. Not for the reasons his family thinks. Though, I'm sorry he died in pain. Sorry he never got to see the mountains he'd dreamed about. But I'm not sorry the marriage ended. She looked at him sideways. Does that make me terrible? Makes you honest. They smoked in companionable silence until the stars began to appear. Rachel pointed out constellations, telling him the stories behind them, Greek myths she'd learned from books back east. Her voice was soothing in the darkness, and Jed found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years. What happened to your wife? The question came soft, almost hesitant. If you don't mind saying. Jed was quiet for so long, Rachel probably thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, the words came haltingly. Colton gang came through while I was in town getting supplies. Martha was here alone. They wanted fresh horses, supplies. She knew they'd cleaned out the Watson place the week before, left nothing but bodies. So she gave them what they wanted. Hoped they'd move on. He paused, took a last draw on the cigarette. They shot her anyway. Sport, I guess, or maybe just because they could. Found her by the corral when I got home. She'd crawled there, trying to let the horses out so they wouldn't steal them. That's why you stay out here alone. Can't protect what isn't here. Rachel stubbed out her cigarette, stood slowly. Can't live either, though. After she went inside, Jed remained on the porch, her words echoing in his mind. The truth of them sat heavy in his chest, right next to the guilt and grief he'd been carrying for 3 years. A week passed, then 2. Rachel's mare improved slowly, and she talked less about leaving. The nightmares came most nights, but she no longer woke gasping. Sometimes Jed heard her moving around the cabin in the dark hours, making tea or standing by the window, and he'd join her. They'd sit at the table, not talking, just being awake together until the fear passed. During the day, they worked side by side. Rachel proved invaluable in preparing for winter. She knew tricks for insulating walls, ways to store vegetables that would keep them fresh longer, how to read weather signs he'd never noticed. She was also, he discovered, a crack shot with a rifle. Thomas again? He asked after she'd brought down a rabbit at 50 yards. My grandmother, actually, said a lady should know how to provide for herself. She smiled at the memory. Scandalized the entire family, teaching me to shoot in the back garden. I was 8. They prepared the rabbit together, Rachel showing him how to use every part of the animal, wasting nothing. As she worked, sleeves rolled up and hair escaping from its pins. Jed caught himself watching her, the efficiency of her movements, the way she bit her lip when concentrating, how her eyes lit up when she laughed at something. Dangerous thoughts. He forced himself to look away, to remember the promise he'd made standing over Martha's grave. Never again. The pain of loss was too high a price for the temporary warmth of connection. But that night, as they ate rabbit stew and Rachel told him about her grandmother's other scandalous teachings, including how to play poker and curse in 3 languages, Jed felt the walls he'd built starting to crack. The fever came on sudden as a thunderstorm. One moment Rachel was helping Jed repair a harness. The next, she was swaying on her feet, face flushed despite the morning chill. She tried to wave off his concern, but when she reached for the water bucket and missed it entirely, he knew something was wrong. I'm fine, she insisted, even as her teeth began to chatter. Just tired. Jed pressed the back of his hand to her forehead and cursed. You're burning up. Come on. The horses can wait. He guided her toward the cabin, alarmed by how heavily she leaned on him. When did this start? Last night, maybe, thought it was just the cold. Inside, he steered her to the bedroom. She protested weakly but couldn't hide her relief at sitting down. Her hands shook as she tried to unlace her boots. Let me. Jed knelt, working the laces free. Her feet were ice cold despite the fever. You've been pushing yourself too hard. Had to earn my keep. She murmured, eyes already growing heavy. Can't be a burden. Something twisted in his chest. You're not. Just rest now. He helped her lie back, pulled the quilts up to her chin. She was asleep before he finished covering her, but it was a restless sleep, full of shivers and small sounds of distress. Jed had seen enough frontier fevers to know they could turn deadly fast. He set water to boil, gathered what medicines he had, precious little. Just some willow bark and a tincture Martha had made years ago. He'd have to ride to Copper Creek if she got worse, but leaving her alone for that long journey felt wrong. The day stretched endless. Rachel's fever climbed, and with it came delirium. She called for Thomas, for her grandmother, for people whose names he didn't recognize. Sometimes she spoke to someone named Samuel, her voice going hard and frightened by turns. "Won't go with you," she said clearly at one point, eyes open but seeing something beyond the cabin walls. "Rather die clean than live dirty." Jed wrung out another cool cloth, placed it on her forehead. "Shh, no one's taking you anywhere." Her hand caught his, grip surprisingly strong. "Promise?" "Promise." She settled some after that, though the fever didn't break. Jed found himself talking to fill the silence, about the ranch, about his plans for spring, about nothing important. His voice seemed to calm her, so he kept going even when he ran out of things to say. Night fell. He made a simple broth from dried beef and the vegetables from Rachel's garden, managed to get a few spoonfuls into her between bouts of fever dreams. She was so pale against the dark quilt, looking younger and more fragile than the capable woman who'd worked beside him these past weeks. He thought about Martha's last hours, how he hadn't been there, how she'd died alone while he haggled over the price of flour in town. The guilt rose up sharp as ever, threatening to choke him. "Not again," he muttered, refreshing the cool cloth. "Not on my watch." Through the night he kept vigil, dosing her with willow bark tea when she'd take it, keeping the fever from burning her up. She thrashed sometimes, fighting invisible demons, and he held her shoulders gently until the fit passed. Other times she went still as death, and he found himself checking for the rise and fall of her chest, sometime near dawn. She spoke his name, not Jed, not Mr. Hartley, but Jedediah, drawing it out like she was tasting the syllables. Her eyes were clearer than they'd been in hours. "I'm here," he said. "Your hands are gentle." She touched his fingers where they rested on the quilt. "Wouldn't have thought it. First time I saw you, you looked hard as these rocks. Hush now. Save your strength." "For what?" A ghost of her stubborn smile appeared. "So I can die strong?" "You're not dying. We're all dying, Jedediah. Question is what we do before we get there." Her eyes drifted closed again. "I'm glad I knocked on your door, even if this is how it ends. These weeks have been good." Something fierce rose up in him then, a refusal to let this woman slip away like smoke. He'd failed Martha, but Rachel was here, now, still fighting even in her delirium. He wouldn't sit idle while another grave needed digging. He remembered something, an old remedy a Navajo trader had mentioned years back, spider root, growing in the high places, good for breaking fevers. He'd seen some near the canyon rim, a hard climb, but not impossible. The sky was lightning gray when he made his decision. He checked Rachel once more, sleeping now, though still too warm, then grabbed his rifle and a gathering bag. The climb was treacherous in the early morning shadows. Loose rocks shifted under his boots, and once he had to press flat against the cliff face as a section of trail crumbled away. But he pushed on, driven by the image of Rachel's pale face, her talk of endings. He found the plant growing in a crevice, just as the trader had described. The roots came free reluctantly, as if the mountain didn't want to give up its medicine. By the time he made it back to the cabin, the sun was full up and his hands were bloody from thorny scrub. Rachel was worse. The fever had her completely now, and she didn't respond when he called her name. He worked fast, brewing the root into a bitter tea, adding honey to make it palatable. Getting her to swallow was a battle, but he persisted with patient determination. "Come on, Rachel, fight this. You're too stubborn to let a fever win." Hours passed. He alternated the spider root tea with willow bark, kept the cool cloths coming, talked until his throat was raw. He told her about the ranch's early days, about the dreams he and Martha had shared. Found himself saying things he'd never spoken aloud, how empty the years had been, how her presence had reminded him what it felt like to be alive. "You can't leave now," he said, exhaustion making him honest. This place just started feeling like home again. The afternoon sun was slanting through the window when he felt it, the fever breaking. Rachel's skin went from burning to clammy, and her breathing deepened into true sleep. Jed sagged with relief, his own hands shaking as he adjusted the quilts. He must have dozed in the chair beside the bed, because he woke to find green eyes watching him. Clear eyes, aware and present. "You look terrible," Rachel whispered. "You should see the other fellow." His voice came out rough. "How do you feel? Like I've been trampled by a herd of buffalo?" She tried to sit up, winced. "How long?" "Day and a half." Her eyes widened. "You've been here the whole time. Where else would I be?" She studied him, taking in his bloodshot eyes, the scratches on his hands, the general dishevelment of a man who'd fought for something and won. "You climbed for spider root." He shrugged, uncomfortable with the wonder in her voice. "You were dying. Most men wouldn't have bothered, not for a woman they barely knew." "Yeah, well," he stood abruptly, needing distance from the softness in her eyes. "I'll make some proper food. You need to build your strength back." But she caught his hand before he could leave. "Jed, thank you." He looked down at their joined hands, hers still too pale, his rough and scarred. "Just returning the favor. You brought this place back to life. Seemed only fair to do the same for you." The days that followed were quiet ones. Rachel recovered slowly, frustrated by her weakness, but accepting Jed's care with more grace than he'd expected. He found himself enjoying the reversal, being the one to cook, to insist she rest, to fuss over her health. "You're hovering," she informed him on the third day, when he'd checked on her for the 5th time before noon. "Am not. Are to sit down before you wear a groove in the floor." He sat, reluctantly, in the chair he'd pulled beside the bed. Rachel was propped up on pillows, color returning to her cheeks, working on mending one of his shirts. The domestic scene struck him with unexpected force. "Tell me about her," Rachel said quietly. "Martha." The name no longer brought the sharp stab of pain, just a deep ache. "What do you want to know?" What was she like, really like, not just the saint that dead wives become in memory? Despite himself. Jed smiled. "Saint? Martha?" She had a temper like a wildfire and a stubborn streak wider than the canyon. Once decided the barn should be painted red instead of natural wood. Did it herself while I was gone, including the part she couldn't properly reach. Looked like a drunk man's idea of decoration. Rachel laughed softly. "Did you repaint it?" "Hell no. She'd have skinned me alive. Lived with that patchy barn for years, and every time I looked at it, I'd remember her standing there covered in red paint, proud as could be. She sounds wonderful. She was, but not perfect. Bad cook. Burned everything. Couldn't carry a tune in a bucket. Scared of mice but would face down a rattler without blinking. The memories came easier now, rounded by time instead of sharp with loss. Used to talk to the chickens like they were people. Gave them all names. Got mad when I'd suggest eating Henrietta for Sunday dinner. You loved her very much. More than I thought possible." He met Rachel's eyes. "Which is why I swore I'd never risk that again. Losing her nearly killed me." "Some days I wished it had." Rachel set down her mending, reached out to touch his hand. "But you survived. You're still here. Existing isn't the same as living." "No," she agreed. "It's not. So, which are you doing now?" The question hung between them, loaded with meaning. Jed looked at their hands, Rachel's small but strong, his weathered by work and loss, somewhere in the past weeks, between shared meals and comfortable silences, between her fever and his vigil. Something had shifted. "I don't know," he admitted. "That's all right." She squeezed his hand gently. "Neither do I, but maybe we can figure it out together." He should pull away, should remind them both that she'd be leaving soon, that this was temporary. that he'd made promises to himself and to Martha's memory. But sitting there in the afternoon light, with Rachel's warmth seeping into his scarred heart, he found he couldn't move. "Tell me about Philadelphia," he said instead. "About the girl who ran off with a trapper?" She smiled, settling back into the pillows. "Well, first you have to understand about my mother's Tuesday salons." They talked until evening painted the sky purple and the first stars appeared. Rachel told him about fancy dress parties and proper etiquette, about the suffocating expectations of society life. He found himself laughing at her impressions of stuffy relatives, at the image of young Rachel sneaking out to meet Thomas at midnight. "No regrets?" he asked as she finished a story about their wedding, a rushed affair in a small chapel, her mother fainting when she heard about leaving. "Never. About Thomas?" She considered. "I regret that I didn't love him the way he loved me. He deserved better than a wife who was more in love with the idea of freedom than with him. Maybe that was enough for him." "Maybe?" She yawned. The days talking catching up with her. "Or maybe we all just make the best of what we get." After she fell asleep, Jed sat watching the stars through the window. He thought about Martha, about the promises he'd made, wondered if she'd understand what was happening here, or if she'd think him faithless for the way his heart was starting to beat again. A coyote howled somewhere in the distance, and its mate answered. The sound used to make him feel more alone, but tonight it just seemed like part of the world's conversation. Creatures calling to each other across the darkness, refusing to be solitary. He checked on Rachel once more, adjusting the quilt around her shoulders, then went to his own bedroll by the fire. But sleep was a long time coming, and when it did, his dreams were full of green eyes and the sound of shared laughter echoing off red rocks. Winter settled over the plateau like a heavy blanket, bringing days of crystalline cold and nights that seemed to stretch forever. Rachel had recovered fully from her fever, throwing herself back into work with renewed energy, as if trying to make up for lost time. But something had changed between them during those long hours of her illness, an acknowledgement of connection that neither quite knew how to handle. They danced around each other now, careful and courteous, maintaining just enough distance to pretend nothing had shifted. Jed found himself watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, the way morning light caught in her hair, how she hummed that meandering tune while kneading bread, the determined set of her shoulders when tackling a difficult task. "Storm coming," Rachel announced one morning, studying the sky with practiced eyes. Big one, from the feel of it. She was right. By afternoon, the wind had picked up, driving ice crystals horizontal across the plateau. They worked together to secure everything they could. Extra hay in the barn, water barrels filled and covered, firewood stacked high on the porch. "How long do these usually last?" Rachel asked, helping him string a guide rope between the cabin and barn. "Could be days. Had one go a full week once." She nodded, businesslike, but he caught the flicker of something in her eyes. Fear? Anticipation? They'd be truly trapped together now. No escape to outside chores, no buffer of physical labor between them. The blizzard hit that night with a fury that shook the cabin walls. Wind screamed through every tiny gap, and snow piled against the windows until they were buried in white darkness. The temperature dropped so fast that frost formed on the inside walls, and their breath clouded even near the fire. "We'll need to keep the stove going constant," Jed said, calculating their wood supply. "And probably sleep out here. Bedroom won't hold heat in this." Rachel emerged from the bedroom carrying quilts and pillows. "Already thought of that." She arranged bedding on either side of the fireplace, keeping that careful distance between their spaces. "I've weathered worse in mountain camps. At least here we have walls." They settled in for the siege, taking turns tending the fire through the night. The second day brought no relief, if anything. The storm intensified. They rationed their movements to preserve warmth, talking across the space between their bedrolls. "Ever get caught in something like this with Thomas?" Jed asked during a particularly violent gust. "Once, in the Tetons, we built a snow cave, lived like bears for 5 days. I thought we'd die there. She pulled the quilt tighter. Part of me wondered if that wouldn't be better than the life we were living. Always moving, never belonging anywhere. You belong here. The words slipped out before he could stop them. Rachel went still, and the only sound was the wind trying to tear the roof off. Do I? She asked quietly. He should take it back, should clarify that he meant temporarily, just until spring. Instead, he found himself nodding. Place hasn't felt this right in years. She didn't respond, but he saw her smile in the firelight before she turned away. On the third night, the wind finally began to ease, though snow still fell steady. They'd grown comfortable in their storm routine, sharing meals cooked over the fire, reading aloud from Jed's small collection of books, playing cards with a worn deck Rachel had produced from her saddlebags. You're cheating, Jed accused after losing his fifth hand of poker. I'm playing the game my grandmother taught me. Her eyes sparkled with mischief. Not my fault you can't read a bluff. Your grandmother was a card sharp? Among other things, she ran a boarding house in Boston after grandfather died. Said she learned more about human nature at those poker tables than in 40 years of marriage. What else did she teach you? Rachel's expression softened. That a woman's strength isn't in her beauty or her ability to please others. It's in her refusal to be anything less than herself. She dealt another hand. She would have liked you. Why's that? You don't try to make me small. Thomas did, without meaning to. Always protecting, always deciding, always knowing better. His love came with walls around it. She met his eyes. You just let me be. The conversation was veering into dangerous territory. Jed focused on his cards, trying to ignore the warmth spreading through his chest that had nothing to do with the fire. By the fourth day, the storm had blown itself out, leaving behind a world transformed. Snowdrifts reached the roof in places, and the familiar landscape had become alien, all curves and white silence. They dug their way out together, carving a path to the barn where the horses waited, hungry but unharmed. Look, Rachel breathed, and he followed her gaze. The sun was setting, painting the snow-covered rocks in shades of rose and gold. Ice crystals in the air caught the light like scattered diamonds. It was beautiful enough to stop the heart, the kind of scene Martha would have made him pause work to appreciate. Thank you, Rachel said softly. For what? For sharing this with me, this place, this life. I know it wasn't what you wanted. No, he agreed. But maybe what we want and what we need aren't always the same thing. That night, with the crisis past and the world accessible again, they maintained their separate bedrolls by the fire out of habit more than necessity. But the space between them felt charged now, full of unspoken possibility. Read more of that book, Rachel requested. The one about the whale. Jed picked up the battered copy of Moby Dick, finding his place, but he'd barely gotten through a page when he realized she'd fallen asleep, exhausted from the day's work. In the firelight, with her face relaxed and unguarded, she looked both younger and older, a woman who'd seen too much but hadn't let it break her spirit. He set the book aside, studying her in the quiet. When had she become necessary to him? When had the idea of her leaving shifted from inevitable to unbearable? The next weeks passed in a blur of winter tasks. They worked to keep the animals fed, ice broken on water troughs, paths clear between buildings. The physical labor was harder now, with snow hampering every movement, but there was satisfaction in facing it together. One afternoon, they were mucking out stalls when Rachel's pitchfork hit something hidden in the hay. She pulled out a small wooden box, dusty and forgotten. What's this? Jed's chest tightened. Just old things. Must have missed it when I cleared out. He reached for it, but she'd already opened the lid. Inside were Martha's treasures. A silver brush, pressed flowers from their wedding, a daguerreotype of a young couple trying not to smile for the camera. Rachel studied the image, then looked up at him. She was beautiful. Yes. You look happy. We were. He took the box gently, closed the lid. Thought I'd gotten rid of all this. Guess some things don't want to stay buried. Maybe they're not meant to. Rachel touched his arm. It's all right to keep her memory. Jed, loving what was doesn't mean you can't love what is. I don't... He stopped, unable to finish the lie, because he did love what is. Love the woman standing before him with hay in her hair and understanding in her eyes. I know, she said simply. Me too. They stood there in the dusty barn, the weight of admission heavy between them. Then Rachel smiled, that stubborn tilt of her chin appearing. But we're not talking about it yet, are we? No, he agreed, relieved and frustrated in equal measure. Not yet. That evening, as they prepared dinner together, the domesticity of it all hit him anew. The way she automatically reached for the plates while he carved the meat. How they moved around each other in the small space without colliding. The comfortable silence that needed no filling. I've been thinking about spring, Rachel said carefully, not meeting his eyes. My mare's healed well. I could probably make that journey north soon. The words sat between them like a stone dropped in still water. Jed's hands stilled on the bread he was slicing. That what you want? I don't know what I want. The admission came out raw. I know I should leave. Every day I stay makes it harder. And you made a promise to yourself. I won't be the reason you break it. What if I want to break it? She looked up then, hope and fear warring in her expression. Do you? Before he could answer, a sound from outside made them both freeze. Horses, multiple ones, approaching through the snow. Rachel went pale. No one travels in weather like this unless... Get the rifles, Jed ordered, already moving. And stay away from the windows. Through a crack in the shutters, he counted 3 riders, hard men on tired horses. His heart sank as he recognized the type, bounty hunters, or men playing at it. They stopped just outside the yard, conferring among themselves. Mrs. Carter, one called out, voice carrying clear in the cold air. We know you're in there, Mr. Morrison wants you back home. Says he'll make it worth everyone's while if you come peaceful. Rachel appeared beside him, rifle steady in her hands. I won't go back. I know. Jed checked his ammunition, mind racing through options. We'll handle this. Not we, me. This is my trouble. Not anymore. The fierce protectiveness that rose in him would have been surprising if he'd had time to examine it. Anyone wants to take you, they go through me first. She looked at him then with something that might have been love if either of them had been brave enough to name it. Jed, together, he said firmly. Whatever comes, we face it together. The lead rider called out again. No need for unpleasantness. Hartley, we got no quarrel with you. Just send the woman out and we'll be on our way. The lady's not going anywhere she doesn't want to. Jed called back. You're on my land uninvited. I'll give you one chance to turn around. Now that's unfriendly. Morrison said you might be difficult. Said to tell you he can make things hard for a man. Even way out here, might be better to... The shot came from Rachel's rifle, kicking up snow at the lead horse's feet. The animal reared, nearly unseating its rider. Next one won't miss, she shouted. I've run far enough. You want me? Come take me. What followed was tense as a drawn bowstring. The riders spread out, trying to flank the cabin, but Jed and Rachel had the advantage of cover and high ground. Shots were exchanged, glass shattered, but they held their position. This is foolish, the leader called during a lull. 3 of us, 2 of you, and more coming if we don't report back. Then you'd better hurry back to report, Jed replied. Tell Morrison his reach doesn't extend to my land. Tell him Mrs. Carter is under my protection now. Your protection? The man laughed ugly. Playing house with another man's woman? That what this is about? The words hit their mark, but before Jed could respond, Rachel fired again. This time the shot grazed the speaker's shoulder, spinning him half around. I am no man's woman, she declared, voice ringing clear. Not Morrison's, not anyone's. I choose where I go and who I stand with, and I choose here. Something seemed to break in the attacker's resolve. Maybe it was the determination in her voice, or the steadiness of their defense. or simply the calculation that Morrison's money wasn't worth dying for in a frozen nowhere. They pulled back, the wounded one cursing steadily. "This isn't over," the leader warned. "Morrison doesn't give up easy." "Neither do I," Jed replied. They watched the riders disappear into the gathering dusk, waited another hour to be sure it wasn't a trick. Only then did Rachel lower her rifle, hands beginning to shake. "They'll be back," she said quietly. "With more men, or with the law twisted to serve them. I've brought danger to your door, just like I feared." "Our door," Jed corrected. He set his rifle aside, turned to face her fully. "You said you'd choose here. Did you mean it?" "Yes." No hesitation now. Just clear certainty. "But that doesn't mean you have to—" He kissed her. Not gentle, not careful, but with all the pent-up longing of the past months. She made a small sound of surprise. Then her arms came around him, rifle clattering forgotten to the floor, when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard. Rachel's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Your promise," she whispered. "You swore never to love again." "I was a fool." He cupped her face in his hands, thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "A man can't promise away his heart any more than he can promise away the sunrise. It happens whether we will it or not." "Jed, stay." The word came out rough, desperate. "Not for shelter, not for work, not until your horse heals. Stay because this is where you belong. Stay because I love you." The tears spilled over then, but she was smiling through them. Such a romantic proposal, surrounded by broken glass and gunpowder. "I can do better. Get flowers from town. Make speeches about your eyes. Don't you dare!" She pulled him down for another kiss. "This is perfect. We're not simple people, Jed Hartley. We're complicated and damaged and carrying ghosts. A pretty proposal would be a lie." "So you'll stay?" "I'll stay. And when Morrison sends more men, we'll face them. When the ghosts get too heavy, we'll carry them together. When—" He silenced her with another kiss, and this time there was no desperation in it, only certainty. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the tracks of the departed riders. Inside, two people who'd sworn off love discovered that some promises were meant to be broken. Later, as they worked together to board up the broken window, Rachel paused. "Martha would approve, I think, of this, of us." Jed considered, remembering his wife's fierce spirit, her determination that life should be lived fully. "Yeah," he said finally. "I think she would." They went back to work, side by side, preparing for whatever battles morning might bring. But for tonight, they were together, and that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The morning after their confrontation with Morrison's men dawned bright and bitter cold. Ice crystals hung in the air like suspended diamonds, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Rachel woke in the bedroom, their bedroom now, to find Jed already up, standing by the window with his coffee, watching the horizon. "See anything?" she asked, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders as she joined him. "Not yet, but they'll come." She leaned into his warmth, still marveling at the simple freedom of it. After months of careful distance, the ability to touch, to seek comfort, felt like a luxury. "We should prepare." After breakfast, he turned to face her, and the tenderness in his eyes made her heart stutter. No point facing trouble on an empty stomach. They moved around the kitchen with new awareness, hands brushing as they reached for the same thing, bodies aligning as they passed in the small space. It wasn't awkward, exactly, but charged with possibility. When Jed's hand settled on her waist as he moved behind her to reach the coffee pot, Rachel felt heat rise to her cheeks like a green girl. "We're acting like fools," she murmured, but she was smiling. "Maybe." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "But I've been sensible for 3 years. Think I've earned a little foolishness." After breakfast, pragmatism took over. They reinforced the shutters, moved furniture to create defensive positions, laid out ammunition where it could be easily reached. Rachel insisted on teaching Jed some tricks she'd learned from a cavalry deserter Thomas had traded with once. Fire from different windows between shots. She demonstrated. Makes them think there's more of us. And keep water buckets handy. They might try to smoke us out. You've done this before. Once, different circumstances, but desperate men think alike. Her jaw tightened. I won't be taken. Jed. Whatever happens, I won't go back to that life. He caught her hand, brought it to his lips. You won't have to. The day stretched taut as a bowstring. They went about necessary chores, but always with one eye on the horizon. The horses seemed to sense the tension, restless in their stalls. Even the chickens were quiet, huddled together against more than just cold. It was late afternoon when Rachel suddenly straightened from checking her rifle. I need you to know something, in case— No. Jed's voice was firm. No, in case. We're going to get through this, and please, let me say it. She set the rifle aside, crossed to where he sat cleaning his revolver. These months with you, I came here running from a life I didn't want, and I found one I never dared dream of. Whatever happens, I need you to know, you gave me myself back. You let me remember who I was before grief and fear made me small. Rachel, I love you. The words came out fierce and certain. Not because you saved me from the storm, or from the fever, or from loneliness. I love you because you see me whole. Because you trust me to stand beside you instead of behind you. Because— He silenced her with a kiss that was desperate and tender at once. When they broke apart, both were breathing unsteadily. When this is over, he said against her lips. We're going to Copper Creek. Going to stand in front of witnesses and make this official. Going to buy you a ring and tell everyone who'll listen that you're my wife. Going to— Jed. She pulled back, eyes dancing despite everything. That sounds an awful lot like a proposal. It is. He cupped her face, thumbs tracing her cheekbones. Marry me, Rachel. Not because you need protection or shelter, but because I can't imagine facing another sunrise without you. You romantic fool. She was crying and laughing at the same time. Yes, of course, yes. They might have stayed there, lost in the moment. But the sound of approaching horses shattered the spell. This time, there were more, at least 6 riders, moving with military precision. Positions, Jed ordered. All business now. They took their places at opposite windows, giving them coverage of all approaches. Through the shutters. Rachel counted the riders, 7 total, including one whose arm was in a sling from her shot the day before. At their head rode a man who could only be Samuel Morrison himself. He was younger than she'd expected, handsome in a cold way, dressed in expensive clothes that looked out of place in the harsh landscape. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. Mrs. Carter, I've come to take you home. This is my home, Rachel called back, steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. Morrison dismounted, approached just close enough to be heard clearly, but not close enough to be an easy target. Smart. Now. Let's discuss this like civilized people. You've had your adventure, proved your point. Time to stop this foolishness. The only foolishness was thinking you could own me. Own you? He sounded genuinely puzzled. I offered you marriage, respectability, a life of comfort. What more could you want? Freedom? Rachel replied. Choice. Love that isn't possession. Morrison's face darkened. And you think you found that here, with this— He gestured dismissively at the cabin. This hermit playing at ranching. He's using you, Rachel. When he tires of you— Jed's shot kicked up dirt at Morrison's feet, making him stumble backward. That's close enough. State your business or move on. My business? Morrison regained his composure, but his voice had gone hard. I've come for my property. See, Mrs. Carter owes me a considerable debt. Her late husband's gambling markers, which I purchased, legally binding, sheriff's seal and everything. Rachel went cold. Thomas didn't gamble. Didn't he? Funny how men hide things from their wives. Morrison produced a leather folder, held it up. $3,000, plus interest. Did you really think I'd let you walk away? "Those are forgeries," Rachel said, but doubt crept in. There had been times Thomas disappeared for days, returning with money he couldn't quite explain. Are they? Well, we'll let a judge decide. Of course, if you can't pay, there are other ways to settle the debt. Marriage, for instance. A wife's debts become her husband's responsibility. "Show me those papers," Jed demanded. Morrison smiled. "Certainly, but you'll need to come get them." It was a trap, obviously, but they needed to know if the documents were real. If Morrison had legal standing, this changed everything. "Cover me," Jed murmured. "No." Rachel caught his arm. "He's trying to draw you out." "Maybe, but we need to know what we're really fighting." Before she could stop him, he'd opened the door, stepped onto the porch with his rifle ready. "Toss them halfway. I'll retrieve them." Morrison considered, then nodded to one of his men. The folder landed in the snow between them. Jed moved forward slowly, every nerve screaming danger. He'd just bent to pick up the papers when it happened. One of Morrison's men, younger and more nervous than the rest, shifted his rifle. Maybe he meant nothing by it. Maybe he was just cold. But in that charged atmosphere, it was enough. Rachel saw the movement, recognized the threat, and fired without thinking. Her shot caught the man in the shoulder, spinning him from his horse. Then everything exploded into chaos. Gunfire erupted from both sides. Jed dove for cover behind the water trough, papers forgotten. Rachel worked her rifle with deadly efficiency, keeping Morrison's men pinned down. Glass shattered, wood splintered, and the air filled with gun smoke and shouts. "Inside!" Jed shouted, providing covering fire as Rachel retreated from the window. He followed, slamming the door just as bullets chewed into the frame. They took new positions, breathing hard. Through the broken window, they could hear Morrison shouting orders, trying to regain control of his men. "How's your ammunition?" Jed asked. "Good for now. You?" "Same, but they can outlast us if it comes to a siege." Rachel's mind raced. "The root cellar. There's an old tunnel Thomas showed me once. Leads out past the barn. Said the previous owner dug it during the Indian Wars. Can we make it? Have to, once they surround us completely." She didn't need to finish. They gathered what they could carry. Ammunition, water, Rachel's saddlebags with their few valuables. The root cellar entrance was in the kitchen floor, hidden beneath a worn rug. As they prepared to descend, something heavy hit the roof. Fire bottles. Jed cursed. "Move!" Smoke began seeping through the ceiling as they dropped into the darkness below. The tunnel was narrow, barely tall enough to stand upright, but it was there, their path to escape, behind them. They could hear the cabin catching fire, Morrison's men shouting in triumph. Rachel's heart broke for Jed, for the home he'd built with his own hands, now destroyed because of her. "Don't," he said, reading her thoughts even in the darkness. "It's just wood and stone. What matters is right here." They moved through the tunnel, guided by touch and memory. It seemed to go on forever, and Rachel began to fear it had collapsed somewhere ahead. But then, blessedly, she felt cold air on her face. They emerged behind a cluster of rocks well past the barn, gasping in the clean winter air. In the distance, orange flames leaped from the cabin, smoke billowing into the twilight sky. "The horses," Rachel whispered. "No time. We go on foot." But as they turned to flee into the gathering darkness, shapes materialized from the shadows. Morrison's men had been smarter than they'd hoped, posting guards at possible escape routes. Well. Morrison himself stepped into view, no longer the polished gentleman. His face was smudged with soot, his eyes wild with anger. "Quite the chase you've given me, Rachel, but it's over now." Jed moved in front of her, rifle raised. "Back off, Morrison. Or what? You'll shoot me?" Morrison spread his arms wide. "Go ahead. My men will cut you down, and I'll still have her. Or—" His voice turned calculating. "We could make a deal." "No deals," Rachel said. "Not even to save his life?" Morrison nodded to his men, who raised their weapons. "Here's my offer. Come with me willingly. and Hartley lives. Refuse, and you can watch him die before I take you anyway." The moment stretched taut. Rachel felt Jed tense beside her, knew he was calculating odds, looking for a way out. But there wasn't one. Not this time. "Don't," Jed said quietly. "Whatever you're thinking, don't." Rachel looked at him, memorizing his face in the firelight. Then she stepped forward. "You let him go. No harm comes to him. Ever. Swear it." "Rachel, no, swear it," she demanded, eyes never leaving Morrison. "You have my word," Morrison said smoothly. "Mr. Hartley will be free to rebuild his life. Perhaps he'll find another desperate woman to warm his bed." The crude words were meant to wound, but Rachel didn't flinch. "And the debts? Come willingly. Be my wife in truth, and they're forgotten." "I need a moment," she said, "to say goodbye." Morrison gestured magnanimously. "1 minute." Rachel turned to Jed, who looked ready to fight the world. "Don't," she said softly. "Please, I won't have your blood on my hands. I won't let you go." "You have to." She reached up, touched his face. "You gave me these months. Gave me love I never thought I'd find. That's more than most people get in a lifetime. Rachel, find someone else," she whispered fiercely. "Someone who doesn't bring destruction to your door. Be happy. Promise me." "I can't. Promise me." He pulled her close, kissed her with desperate passion. "I promise." He lied against her lips. "But this isn't over." "Time's up," Morrison called. Rachel extracted herself from Jed's arms, though it felt like tearing away part of her soul. She walked toward Morrison with her head high, every inch the proper lady she'd been raised to be. "Wise choice," Morrison said, reaching for her arm. That's when they heard it. Hoofbeats, dozens of them, thundering through the darkness. Everyone turned as riders burst into view. And at their head, "Sheriff Daniels," Morrison said, confidence returning. "Just in time. I've recovered my stolen property." But the sheriff, a grizzled man Jed recognized from Copper Creek, didn't look pleased. "That's so? Funny thing. Mr. Morrison. Got a telegraph this afternoon. Seems those gambling debts you've been waving around? They're forgeries. The man whose signature you copied? He's been willing to testify, for the right incentive." Morrison went pale. "That's impossible." "Is it?" A new voice spoke from among the riders. Rachel gasped as a familiar figure dismounted. An elderly woman, straight-backed despite her years. "Grandmother?" "Hello, dear one." Elizabeth Cartwright smiled. "Did you really think I'd let you disappear without a fight? I've had investigators on your trail for months. When they reported this situation, I decided to handle things personally. This is a family matter," Morrison blustered. "No concern of the law. Forgery is very much the law's concern." Sheriff Daniels said, "As is attempted kidnapping, destruction of property, and assault. You're under arrest. Morrison, you and your men." What followed was swift. Morrison's hired guns, faced with real law and outnumbered besides, surrendered quickly. Morrison himself had to be subdued, cursing and threatening until the sheriff finally gagged him. Through it all, Rachel stood frozen, unable to quite believe it was real. Then her grandmother was there, gathering her into arms that smelled of lavender and home. "My brave girl," Elizabeth murmured. "I'm so sorry it took me this long to find you." "How did you?" "Your mother finally told me the truth. About Thomas, about why you really left. I've been searching ever since." She pulled back, studied Rachel's face. "You look different, stronger." "I am different." Rachel's eyes found Jed, who stood apart, watching with an unreadable expression. "Grandmother, this is Jedediah Hartley. He saved my life." Elizabeth Cartwright's sharp eyes missed nothing. "Did he now? And is that all he did?" Heat rose in Rachel's cheeks. "Grandmother." "Oh, hush. I'm old, not blind." She approached Jed, who straightened under her scrutiny. "Mr. Hartley, my granddaughter seems much attached to you." "The feeling is mutual, ma'am." "Good, Because she's been through enough. If you intend to toy with her affections, I intend to marry her, Jed said firmly. If she'll still have me. Elizabeth's stern expression cracked, revealing a smile. Well then, I suppose we have a wedding to plan? As the sheriff's men led Morrison away and the chaos settled, Rachel found herself back in Jed's arms. Around them, the cabin still smoldered, their life in ruins. But she couldn't bring herself to care. You're home, she said. I'm so sorry. I told you, he said, holding her tight. You're my home. Everything else is just details. Her grandmother cleared her throat. Not to interrupt, but perhaps we should continue this somewhere warmer. My hotel in Copper Creek has rooms available. And Mr. Hartley, I insist you accept my hospitality while you rebuild. It's the least I can do for the man who protected my granddaughter. Jed looked like he might argue, but Rachel squeezed his hand. Say yes. She's even more stubborn than I am. I see where you get it from, he murmured, then louder. We'd be grateful, Mrs. Cartwright. As they prepared to leave, Rachel took one last look at the smoldering cabin. So much had happened within those walls, pain and healing, loneliness and love, death and rebirth. We'll build it better, Jed promised, following her gaze. Bigger, room for children. Children? She turned to him, eyes bright with tears and hope. Many as you want, going to fill that canyon with laughter. You romantic fool, she said, echoing her earlier words. I love you. And I love you. Always will. As they rode toward Copper Creek, Rachel between Jed and her grandmother, she marveled at how much could change in a single night. She'd arrived at his door months ago with nothing but fear and desperate hope. Now she was leaving with everything, love, family, future, behind them. The last flames died out, leaving only stone and memories. Ahead, the lights of town beckoned, promising new beginnings. And somewhere between what was lost and what was found, two broken people had discovered that sometimes the strongest structures are built from the ashes of what came before. 3 weeks had passed since the fire. 3 weeks of adjusting to life in Copper Creek while plans were made to rebuild. Elizabeth Cartwright had taken over the best rooms at the Frontier Hotel, transforming the rustic establishment into something approaching Eastern comfort. But comfort, Rachel discovered, could be its own kind of cage. You're pacing again, Jed observed from his seat by the window. He'd taken to spending his days in Rachel's suite, partly for propriety's sake. Her grandmother insisted on maintaining appearances, and partly because being apart had become unbearable. I can't help it. These walls feel smaller every day. Rachel pressed her hands against the glass, staring out at the muddy main street. I know we need to wait for better weather to start building, but you're not made for town life. He rose, came to stand behind her, hands settling on her shoulders. Neither am I. It was true. 3 weeks of curious stares, of whispered gossip about the widow and the hermit, of her grandmother's well-meaning attempts to civilize them both. It was wearing on them like a poorly fitted harness. Mrs. Morrison's trial is next week, Rachel said, referring to the name the townspeople insisted on using despite her corrections. Sheriff Daniels says I'll need to testify. We'll face it together. Will we? She turned in his arms, searching his face. You've been different lately, distant. Jed's jaw tightened. Your grandmother thinks. I don't care what she thinks. You should. She's right about some things. He moved away, that careful distance returning. You could go back east with her, start fresh, find someone who doesn't come with burned homes and bad memories. Rachel felt anger rise hot in her chest. Is that what you want, for me to leave? I want what's best for you. Then stop deciding what that is without asking me. The words came out sharper than intended, but she didn't take them back. This is exactly what I ran from, men making choices for my own good. I thought you were different. I am. Are you? Because from where I stand, you're doing exactly what Thomas did, what Morrison tried to do, deciding my life for me. Jed flinched as if slapped. That's not fair. Isn't it? Rachel crossed her arms, chin lifting in that stubborn way he usually loved. Have you asked what I want, even once? What do you want? You! The word burst out of her, fierce and frustrated. I want you, and our life, and to rebuild that cabin and fill it with love and laughter and probably arguments because we're both too stubborn for our own good. I want to wake up beside you for the next 50 years and work that land until my hands are as rough as yours. I want, her voice broke, I want you to stop pushing me away. The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Then Jed crossed the space between them in 2 strides, pulling her against him with desperate strength. I'm sorry, he said into her hair. I'm so damn sorry. When I see you here, in silk dresses, with your grandmother talking about society and proper marriages, I wonder if I'm being selfish, keeping you from an easier life. Oh, you beautiful fool. Rachel pulled back to frame his face with her hands. Don't you understand? The easy life nearly killed me. It was the hard life, our life, that brought me back to myself. He kissed her then, pouring weeks of frustration and longing into the connection. When they broke apart, both were breathless. No more pushing me away, Rachel demanded. No more, he agreed. But your grandmother, my grandmother means well, but she doesn't understand. She sees what she wants to see. Her granddaughter rescued from hardship, ready to return to civilization. Rachel smiled wryly. She can't comprehend that I was rescued by the hardship, not from it. A knock interrupted them. Elizabeth Cartwright entered without waiting for permission, taking in their embrace with raised eyebrows. Well, she said dryly, I suppose I should be grateful you're both fully clothed. Grandmother. Oh, don't grandmother me. Child. I was young once, difficult as that may be to believe. She settled into a chair with regal grace. Mr. Hartley, I believe it's time we had a frank discussion. Ma'am, you love my granddaughter? Yes. And you intend to marry her? As soon as she'll have me, which would be immediately. Rachel interjected. Elizabeth studied them both with sharp eyes. And then what? Back to that wilderness? Back to isolation and hardship? Back to home, Jed corrected quietly. Back to the life we're building together. I see. Elizabeth was quiet for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. Good. Rachel blinked. Good? Did you think I'd object? Child, I've spent the last year searching for you, fearing you were dead or worse, finding you alive, strong, and in love? That's more than I dared hope for. Her expression softened. Your mother wanted me to bring you back east. True, but I know my granddaughter. You've never been happy in cages, even gilded ones. Then why all the talk of society? The dresses? The pressure? Because I had to be sure. Both of you. Elizabeth's gaze moved between them. Love born in crisis doesn't always survive peace. I needed to know that you chose each other, not just the circumstances that brought you together. Jed felt a rush of respect for the elderly woman. You were testing us. Of course I was. My granddaughter's happiness is at stake. She rose, smoothing her skirts. Now then, since you're both determined to return to the wilderness, we should discuss practical matters. That land of yours. Mr. Hartley, I assume you'll need capital to rebuild? I'll manage, Jed said stiffly. Pride is a poor building material, Elizabeth replied. Consider it a wedding gift, or better yet, a business investment. I've been looking to diversify my holdings, and Western property seems a sound venture. Grandmother, Rachel warned. What? I'm not offering charity. I expect a return on my investment. Grandchildren, specifically. Several of them. Rachel's cheeks flamed, but she was smiling. You're incorrigible. I'm practical. Now, about the wedding itself. What followed was a negotiation as complex as any business deal. Elizabeth wanted a proper ceremony with half of Philadelphia in attendance. Rachel wanted something simple, just family and close friends. Jed mostly wanted it over with so they could return to their life. They compromised on a small ceremony in Copper Creek, with Elizabeth's blessing to skip the society reception she'd envisioned. The date was set for the following week. After Morrison's trial concluded, But the world, as always, had other plans. The stranger arrived that evening, just as they were sitting down to dinner in the hotel dining room. He was young, travel-worn, with the urgent air of someone carrying bad news. His eyes found Jed across the room and widened with relief. "Mr. Hartley? Jedediah Hartley?" Jed rose slowly. "That's me. Thank God, I've been riding for 3 days." The young man swayed on his feet. "My name's William Colton. My father was Jake Colton." The dining room went silent. Everyone knew the Colton gang. The terror they'd brought to the territory before most were hanged or scattered. Jed's hand moved instinctively toward where his gun would be. "Easy." William raised his hands. "I'm not here for trouble. The opposite. I have information about your wife. Your first wife. About how she really died." Rachel heard Jed's sharp intake of breath, saw his knuckles go white on the table edge. "She died when your father's gang robbed our place." "No, sir. That's what they wanted everyone to think, but—" William glanced around nervously. "Could we speak privately? What I have to say, it changes everything." They moved to Elizabeth's suite, the young man gratefully accepting coffee and food. When he'd recovered somewhat, he began his tale. "My father was a bad man, I won't pretend otherwise. But he kept journals, detailed records of every job, every killing, called it his insurance. After he was hanged, they came to me." William pulled out a worn leather book. "The entry about your ranch, it doesn't match what people say happened." With trembling hands, he opened to a marked page. "According to this, they never meant to hit your place. They were after the Hendersons, 5 miles south. But someone paid them to make a detour. Paid them to kill your wife, specifically." The coffee cup slipped from Jed's numb fingers, shattering on the floor. "What? There's more. The payment came with instructions. Make it look like random violence. Leave no witnesses." William's voice dropped. "But my father wrote down everything, including who paid him. Samuel Morrison." Rachel gasped. "But why? Jed didn't even know Morrison then." "But Martha did." William continued grimly. "She'd refused his advances years before, when she lived in Bentwood, publicly, made him look the fool. When he learned she'd married, moved away. He couldn't let the insult stand." Jed stood abruptly, rage transforming his features into something dangerous. "You're saying Morrison ordered my wife's death because she refused him?" "That's exactly what I'm saying, and there's proof." William tapped the journal. "Names, dates, amounts paid. Enough to hang him twice over." The room erupted. Jed was halfway to the door before Rachel caught him, throwing her full weight against his chest. "No, Jed, stop!" "Let me go." His voice was deadly calm, more frightening than any shout. "I'm going to kill him. He's in jail, under guard. You can't—" "Watch me. Jedediah Hartley, you listen to me." Rachel grabbed his face, forced him to meet her eyes. "You think Martha would want this? You think she'd want you to hang for murdering the man who killed her? I don't care. I care." The words came out raw, desperate. "I've lost one husband. I won't lose another to vengeance. Please, Jed, please." Something in her voice penetrated his rage. He stopped struggling, though his whole body remained taut as a bowstring. He killed her, Rachel, ordered her death like she was nothing. "I know, and he'll pay for it. But through the law, not through blood." She pressed her forehead to his. "Don't let him take you from me, too." Elizabeth, who'd been silent throughout, finally spoke. "Young man, William, would you be willing to testify? To show this journal to the authorities? That's why I'm here. I've spent 3 years trying to make amends for my father's sins. This seemed like a place to start. Then we take this to Sheriff Daniels tonight." Elizabeth decided. Morrison's trial just became much more serious than forgery and attempted kidnapping. What followed was a blur of legal procedures. Sheriff Daniels, after examining the journal and questioning William extensively, added murder charges to Morrison's growing list. The trial, already a sensation, became the biggest event in Copper Creek's history. Rachel testified first about the harassment, the forged debts, the attempted abduction. She spoke clearly and calmly, though Jed could see the toll it took in the tremor of her hands. Then came William Colton, producing the damning journal. The courtroom exploded when he read the relevant passages aloud. Morrison's expensive lawyer tried to discredit him, but the evidence was too detailed, too specific. Finally, unexpectedly, Jed was called to testify. He thought his role was only as a witness to recent events, but the prosecutor had other ideas. And Mr. Hartley, tell us about your wife, your first wife. So he did. For the first time in public, he spoke about Martha, her spirit, her kindness, her dreams for their future. He spoke about finding her body, about 3 years of believing it was random violence. His voice remained steady, but tears ran unchecked down his face. And now, knowing it was orchestrated, Jed looked directly at Morrison, who'd gone pale as paper. Now I know that evil sometimes wears expensive clothes, but I also know that justice, real justice, comes from the law, not from a gun. The jury deliberated for less than an hour, guilty on all counts. Morrison would hang, though his lawyer immediately filed appeals that would likely drag on for months. Outside the courthouse, in the cold spring air, Jed stood staring at nothing. Rachel found him there, slipped her hand into his. "How do you feel?" he considered. "Empty. I thought knowing would help, that justice would ease something. But Martha's still gone." "Yes, but now you know it wasn't random. Wasn't something you could have prevented by being home." Rachel squeezed his hand. "The guilt you've been carrying, it was never yours to bear." "Maybe?" He turned to her. "Is it wrong that I'm grateful? That Morrison's evil brought you to my door? If it is, then I'm wrong too, because I can't regret the path that brought me to you, no matter how dark it was." They stood together as the sun set, watching the town prepare for evening. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, rebuilding, creating a life together, healing from all their wounds. But for now, they had this: justice served, truth revealed, and love strong enough to weather any storm. "Ready to go home?" Rachel asked. "We don't have a home. It burned, remember? Home isn't walls and a roof." She smiled up at him. "Home is wherever we're together." Jed pulled her close, marveling again at this woman who'd changed everything. "Then yes, I'm ready to go home." They walked back to the hotel hand in hand, past curious townspeople and whispering gossips. Let them talk. The opinion of strangers mattered little compared to the truth they'd built between them. A love forged in hardship, tested by fire, and strong enough to last a lifetime. The wedding could wait another day or two. Tonight, they had each other, and that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The days following Morrison's trial passed in a strange haze. Justice had been served, but it left behind an emptiness that neither Jed nor Rachel quite knew how to fill. They went through the motions of wedding preparations, smiled at well-wishers, accepted congratulations on Morrison's conviction, but underneath lay an unspoken tension. It came to a head 3 nights before their planned wedding. In Elizabeth's suite at the hotel, Rachel found Jed standing by the window again, that distant look in his eyes that had become too familiar. "You're doing it again," she said softly. "Doing what?" "Pulling away, building walls." She moved to stand beside him. "Talk to me." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, "I went to Martha's grave today. First time since the fire." Rachel waited, knowing he'd continue when ready. "I told her about you, about us. Felt like she should know." His laugh was hollow. "Crazy, talking to a stone. Not crazy at all. I thought finding out the truth about her death would give me peace. Instead, I feel guilty, like I'm betraying her memory by being happy." Rachel's heart ached for him. "Do you think Martha would want you to suffer forever?" "No, she'd probably box my ears for even suggesting it." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. She was practical that way. "Life is for the living, Jedediah," she used to say. Wise woman. She was. He turned to face Rachel fully. But knowing something in your head and feeling it in your heart are different things. I know. Rachel took his hands, rough and warm in hers. After Thomas died, I felt guilty for being relieved, for feeling free. It took me months to realize that complicated feelings don't cancel each other out. You can mourn Martha and love me. You can grieve what was while celebrating what is. How'd you get so wise? Hard living and good teachers. She reached up to touch his face. We don't have to get married yet. If you're not ready, I'm not going anywhere. No. His response was immediate, fierce. No. I've waited long enough. Wasted 3 years being a ghost. I want to marry you. Rachel Carter, I want to start living again. The kiss that followed was different from their others. Deeper, more desperate, full of promise and need. When they broke apart, both were breathing unsteadily. 3 more days, Rachel murmured against his lips. Too long. My grandmother would have apoplexy if we eloped now. Might be worth it to see her face. They were interrupted by a sharp knock. Sheriff Daniels entered, hat in hand, expression grim. Sorry to disturb, but we got a problem. Morrison's escaped. The words hung in the air like smoke. Jed's hands tightened on Rachel's arms. How? He demanded. Transport wagon was ambushed on the way to the territorial prison. 2 deputies dead. Morrison and 3 others gone. The sheriff's weathered face was hard. Got a witness says Morrison was shouting about unfinished business. Figured you should know. Rachel felt ice in her veins. He's coming here. Already got men watching the hotel, Daniels assured them. And patrols on the roads, but thought you might want to consider moving somewhere more defensible. No. Jed's voice was granite. No more running. No more hiding. If Morrison wants to finish this, he knows where to find me. After the sheriff left, they sat in tense silence. Elizabeth, who'd remained quiet throughout, finally spoke. This changes things. No, Rachel said firmly. It doesn't. We're not postponing the wedding because of that man. He's taken enough from us. Rachel, Jed began. No, I won't let him control our lives anymore. We'll take precautions. Yes, post guards. Be careful. But we're getting married as planned. Her eyes blazed with determination. I refuse to give him the satisfaction of disrupting our happiness again. Jed studied her. This woman who'd faced down gunmen, survived frontier hardships, and still stood unbowed. All right, but we do this smart. No unnecessary risks. They spent the next days in careful preparation. The hotel became a fortress, with armed men at every entrance. Rachel chafed at the restrictions but understood their necessity. She was rarely alone, always accompanied by either Jed or one of the deputies, the night before the wedding. Tradition demanded the couple spend apart. Rachel lay in her bed, listening to every creak and whisper of wind, starting at shadows. Somewhere out there, Morrison was planning something. She could feel it like electricity before a storm. A soft tap at her window made her heart leap, but it was only Jed, balanced precariously on the ledge outside. What are you doing? She whispered, letting him in. You'll break your neck. Had to see you. He pulled her into his arms. Tomorrow feels too far away. They stood there in the darkness, holding each other, drawing strength from the connection. Neither spoke of their fears, but both felt them, the weight of threat, the possibility that happiness might be snatched away again. Whatever happens tomorrow, Rachel began. Nothing's going to happen. Jed interrupted. We're going to get married, have a celebration, and start our life together. Morrison can rot in hell. But if... He silenced her with a kiss. No ifs. We've lived too long in the shadow of if. Tomorrow is about us, not him. When he left, through the door this time at Rachel's insistence, she felt both more settled and more anxious. One more night, then they'd be married, bound by law and love, facing whatever came together. The wedding day dawned clear and bright, unusual for early spring. Rachel woke to her grandmother fussing with last-minute details, the room filling with flowers and well-meaning chaos. She submitted to the ministrations, hair carefully pinned. Her mother's wedding dress altered to fit, a touch of color to her cheeks, though excitement had already provided plenty. "You're radiant," Elizabeth declared, stepping back to admire her work. "That young man won't know what hit him. I hope he recognizes me under all this finery." "Oh, he'll recognize you, the way that man looks at you." Elizabeth's eyes misted. "It reminds me of your grandfather. God rest him. That kind of love is rare. Child, treasure it." "I do. I will." The church was small but packed with townspeople. News of their story had spread, and everyone wanted to witness the hermit and the widow claim their happiness. Armed deputies stood at the doors, a reminder of the danger lurking, but Rachel refused to let it dim her joy. Then the music started, and she saw Jed waiting at the altar, and everything else faded away. He wore a new suit, looking uncomfortable but handsome in the formal clothes. But it was his expression that stopped her heart. Wonder and love, and a fierce protectiveness that said he'd face down the world for her. When their eyes met, his face transformed with a smile so genuine it took her breath away. The walk down the aisle felt both eternal and instant. Then she was beside him, her hand in his, and nothing else mattered. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Mills began, "we gather today to witness something precious, two souls choosing to become one, despite all the forces that tried to keep them apart." The ceremony proceeded smoothly, though Rachel noticed how Jed's eyes kept scanning the windows, how the deputies shifted nervously at every sound. But Morrison didn't appear, and soon they were speaking their vows. "Rachel," Jed said, his voice strong and clear, "you came to my door in a storm, and became the light that led me out of darkness. I promise to love you, protect you, and stand beside you through whatever storms may come. You gave me back my life. Now I give it to you, freely and completely." Rachel had to swallow twice before she could speak. "Jed, you offered shelter to a stranger and became my home. I promise to love you, challenge you when you need it, comfort you when you don't, and build a life with you that honors both our pasts while embracing our future. You saw me whole when I was broken. Now I choose to be whole with you. Always." "The rings?" Reverend Mills prompted. Jed produced a simple gold band, sliding it onto Rachel's finger with hands that trembled slightly. "With this ring, I thee wed." Rachel did the same, her own hand steady. "With this ring, I thee wed. By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss—" The church doors burst open with a crash that echoed like thunder. Morrison stood there, wild-eyed and armed, two other men flanking him. "Sorry to interrupt," he snarled, gun trained on the couple, "but I believe I have business to conclude." Chaos erupted. Deputies moved to draw their weapons. Townspeople screamed and ducked for cover, but Morrison fired a shot into the ceiling, freezing everyone in place. Nobody moves, nobody dies, except maybe the happy couple. His laugh was unhinged. "Did you really think I'd let you have her? Hartley? Let you live happily ever after while I hang? It's over, Morrison." Sheriff Daniels called out, "You're surrounded. Put down the gun." "Over?" Morrison's eyes never left Jed and Rachel. "No, Sheriff, it's just beginning. See, I've been thinking during my incarceration about justice, about what's fair." His gun swung between them. "He took everything from me, my reputation, my freedom, my future. Seems only right I return the favor." "Then shoot me," Jed said calmly, stepping in front of Rachel. "But let her go. Your quarrel is with me." "No!" Rachel tried to move around him, but he held her back. "You want someone to blame, Morrison? Blame yourself. You killed Martha. You tried to force me into marriage. You brought this on yourself." "Shut up!" Morrison's control cracked. "You were supposed to be grateful, supposed to see what I was offering. Instead, you chose him. A nobody, a hermit, a broken man living with ghosts." "Yes," Rachel said firmly. "I chose him, and I'd choose him again, 1,000 times over, because he's worth 100 of you." Morrison's face contorted with rage. Time seemed to slow as his finger tightened on the trigger. Jed shoved Rachel aside, preparing to take the bullet meant for her, but the shot that rang out wasn't from Morrison's gun. William Colton stood in the side door of the church, smoking rifle in hand. Morrison looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest, surprise replacing rage on his face. "For Martha Hartley," William said quietly, "and for my father's other victims. May you find the justice in hell you escaped on earth." Morrison fell, gun clattering across the floor. His men threw down their weapons, surrendering to the deputies who swarmed them. In moments, it was over. Rachel found herself on the floor, Jed's arms around her, both of them shaking with reaction. Around them, chaos reigned as people emerged from cover, voices rising in shock and relief. "Are you hurt?" Jed was running his hands over her, checking for injuries. "I'm fine. You?" "Fine." He pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. "God, Rachel, when he pointed that gun at you..." "Shh, it's over. Really over this time." Reverend Mills appeared above them, looking shaken but determined. "Well now, I believe I was in the middle of something." He raised his voice. "If everyone could settle down, I have a marriage to complete." Laughter rippled through the church, slightly hysterical but genuine. Jed helped Rachel to her feet, both of them disheveled but unwilling to delay another moment. "As I was saying," Reverend Mills continued as if gunmen hadn't just invaded his church, "I now pronounce you husband and wife, Mr. Hartley. Kiss your bride." This time, no one interrupted. Jed cupped Rachel's face in his hands, kissing her with all the passion and promise and relief of the moment. The church erupted in cheers, the sound washing over them like a benediction. "I love you, Mrs. Hartley," Jed murmured against her lips. "And I love you, Mr. Hartley, for better or worse. I think we've covered worse pretty thoroughly. Then it's time for better." They walked back down the aisle, hand in hand, past Morrison's covered body, past weeping townspeople and grinning deputies, out into the bright spring sunshine. The world felt new, washed clean, full of possibility. The reception was held at the hotel, subdued at first but gradually warming as shock gave way to celebration. William Colton tried to slip away, but Rachel caught him at the door. "Thank you," she said simply. "You saved our lives." "I saved my own soul," he replied. "Maybe now I can stop trying to atone for my father's sins and start living my own life. That sounds like wisdom." She smiled. "Stay for the party? You're a hero today." He stayed, and as the afternoon wore on, the shadow of violence faded. There was music and dancing and probably too much whiskey. Elizabeth Cartwright, after several glasses of champagne, regaled the crowd with embarrassing stories of Rachel's childhood. Jed laughed more than Rachel had ever heard, the sound warming her from within. As evening approached, they slipped away from the celebration, walking hand in hand to the edge of town where horses waited. "Ready to go home?" Jed asked, helping her mount. "We still don't have a home to go to," she reminded him. "We'll camp under the stars tonight, start rebuilding tomorrow, together." "Together," she agreed. They rode out as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of fire. Behind them lay the town with all its complexities and memories. Ahead stretched the vast plateau, their land, their future. "No regrets?" Jed asked as they made camp that night, the stars brilliant overhead. Rachel considered, then shook her head. "How can I regret the path that brought me to you? Every hardship, every loss, every moment of fear, they all led here, to us, to this." He pulled her close, and they lay together under the vast western sky, finally free of the past's shadows. Tomorrow would bring work and challenges, the task of building not just a home, but a life. There would be hard days ahead, no doubt, but they would face them together. For now, they had this, each other, the land they loved, and a future stretching as wide and promising as the horizon. It was more than either had dared hope for when a desperate woman knocked on a hermit's door in a storm. It was everything. Spring arrived in earnest, painting the plateau in colors Rachel had never noticed during those desperate winter months. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows, Indian paintbrush, desert marigolds, and purple lupines swaying in the warm breeze. The world seemed to celebrate with them as they stood surveying their land, planning where to build their new home. "Higher than before," Jed said, pointing to a rise that overlooked the valley. "Better view, and the drainage will be improved." "And bigger," Rachel added, sketching in the dirt with a stick. "A proper kitchen here, maybe a separate room for—" She paused, color rising in her cheeks. "4," he prompted, though his smile said he knew. "For children, eventually." He pulled her close, kissing her temple. "I like the sound of eventually." They'd been camping on the land for 2 weeks now, living simply while they cleared the old foundation and prepared the new site. Elizabeth had returned to Philadelphia after extracting promises of regular letters and future visits. Her parting gift had been substantial, enough to build not just a house but a proper ranch, though she'd waved off their thanks with typical briskness. "Consider it an investment in my future grandchildren," she'd said, making Rachel blush and Jed chuckle. Now, as they worked side by side in the spring sunshine, those future possibilities seemed tangible. The trauma of winter, the fear, the violence, the losses hadn't disappeared, but it had softened into something bearable, like scar tissue over old wounds. "Riders coming," Jed observed, shading his eyes. Rachel tensed, old habits dying hard, but relaxed when she recognized Sheriff Daniels and, surprisingly, William Colton. They'd heard William had stayed in Copper Creek, working at the livery stable, trying to build an honest life. "Morning, folks," the sheriff called. "Thought you should hear the news proper. Morrison's men were tried and convicted. They'll be serving time, but they gave up something interesting in exchange for lighter sentences." "Oh." Jed helped the men dismount, Rachel already filling cups with water from their barrel. "Seems Morrison had quite the operation. Forged documents, intimidation, even claim jumping. You weren't his only victims, not by far." Daniels accepted the water gratefully. "The territorial judge wants to compensate folks who were wronged. You're entitled to a portion of Morrison's estate." Rachel and Jed exchanged glances. "We don't want his blood money," Rachel said firmly. "Figured you'd say that." The sheriff smiled. "That's why I brought young William here. He's got a proposal." William stepped forward, nervous but determined. "I've been thinking about what you said, Mrs. Hartley, about stopping trying to atone for my father's sins, but there are still debts to be paid, wrongs to be righted." He took a breath. "I want to use Morrison's money to help his victims rebuild. Start a fund, maybe for folks who lost their homes or livelihoods to men like him and my father." "That's a noble idea," Jed said slowly. "But why tell us?" "Because I want you to help run it. You two, more than anyone. Understand what it means to lose everything and start over. Your guidance could help others do the same." Rachel felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the last chains of bitterness. "We'll think about it," she promised. After the men left, they sat on the foundation stones of their future home, watching the sun track across the sky. "It's strange," Rachel mused, "how something so evil could lead to something potentially good. Maybe that's how the world balances itself. Darkness creating opportunities for light." "Listen to you, getting philosophical." She nudged him playfully. "What happened to my taciturn cowboy? He married a woman who makes him think too much." He caught her hand, threaded their fingers together. "What do you think? About William's proposal?" I think helping others rebuild could help us too. Complete the healing, in a way." "Agreed. But first, we build our own place. Can't help others if we're still sleeping under stars." "I don't know." Rachel leaned into him. "Sleeping under stars isn't so bad when you're there." They worked through spring into summer, their home rising from the earth like something organic. Neighbors came to help, the barn-raising tradition extending to house building. Men who'd once called Jed a ghost now shared stories and laughter as they worked. Women who'd whispered about the scandal of the widow and hermit now brought food and friendship. The house took shape differently than either of Jed's previous homes, where his first cabin had been built for practicality and the second for dreams with Martha. This one was built for partnership. Every decision was made together, every room planned with their shared future in mind. "I want big windows here," Rachel said one day, standing in what would be their main room. "So we can see the storms coming across the plateau. You sure? After everything storms have brought us? Especially after storms brought me to your door. Remember? I won't hide from them now." The windows were installed the next week, grand things that flooded the house with light. By midsummer, the house was habitable. Though not finished, they moved in anyway, tired of camping, eager to nest. That first night in their new home, they sat on the porch they'd built facing west, watching the sunset paint the rocks in shades of gold and crimson. "I have something for you," Rachel said, producing a wrapped package. Inside was a wooden sign, carefully carved, "The Hartley Ranch, where storms lead home." Jed traced the letters, throat tight. "It's perfect." William made it. "He's gotten quite good with woodworking." She hesitated. "I've been thinking about his proposal, about helping others. What if we started small, offered work here to folks who need a second chance? You want to take in strays?" But he was smiling. "Why not? We were both strays once. Look how that turned out." He couldn't argue with that logic. Within a month, they'd hired 2 hands, a young man running from mistakes in Texas and an older woman whose husband had died leaving debts. Both worked hard, grateful for the chance to begin again. The ranch prospered through summer into fall. They raised cattle and horses, planted crops in the valley, built something sustainable and good. The fund William had proposed became reality, with Rachel managing the accounts and Jed vetting those who applied for help. They'd already assisted 3 families in starting over, the work filling a need in their hearts they hadn't known existed. One evening in late September, as golden aspens announced autumn's arrival, Rachel stood at those big windows watching a storm roll in. Jed found her there, wrapped his arms around her from behind. "What are you thinking?" "About circles. How I arrived in a storm, and now I watch them from safety. How you lost a wife to violence and saved another from it. How pain led to joy. Lost to finding. Deep thoughts for a Tuesday evening." She turned in his arms. "I have something to tell you." Something in her tone made him still. "What is it? Remember how we built that extra room? For eventually?" She took his hand, placed it on her still flat stomach. "Eventually is coming sooner than we planned. Around spring, the doctor thinks." Jed stared at her, then at where his hand rested, then back at her face. We're... Yes. The joy that broke across his face was like sunrise after the longest night. He swept her up, spinning her around as she laughed, then set her down gently as if she were spun glass. "A baby," he breathed. "Our baby. Our baby," she confirmed, tears streaming down her face. "Are you happy?" "Happy?" He cupped her face, kissing her deeply. "Rachel, you've given me everything. A home, a purpose, a future. And now this? I don't have words for what I feel." "Then show me instead." That night, as the storm passed over their house without touching their peace, they celebrated new life in the bed they'd shared as husband and wife. Outside, rain washed the land clean. Inside, 2 people who'd thought love had passed them by discovered it was only just beginning. Winter came gentler that year, or perhaps it only seemed so from the warmth of their completed home. Rachel grew round with child as snow blanketed the plateau. They spent evenings by the fire, Jed reading aloud while Rachel knitted tiny garments. The hands they'd hired became family of sorts, sharing meals and stories, building community where once there'd been only isolation. "I've been thinking about names," Rachel said one snowy evening. "Oh? Martha, if it's a girl, would that be all right?" Jed set down his book, emotion thick in his throat. "She'd be honored. And if it's a boy, Thomas William, for my past and for the young man who helped save our future." Perfect choices. He moved to sit beside her, hand resting on her swollen belly. Though I have a feeling it's a girl, stubborn like her mother, from the way she kicks. Stubborn like her father. You mean, we're both stubborn. Poor child doesn't stand a chance. They laughed, the sound filling their home with warmth no fire could match. As winter gave way to spring once more, the ranch prepared for its newest arrival. The doctor from Copper Creek took up temporary residence. Elizabeth arrived from Philadelphia with enough baby clothes for triplets. And William Colton finished a beautiful cradle as a gift, on a morning when the wildflowers were just beginning to bloom, when the air was soft with promise and new beginnings. Martha Elizabeth Hartley entered the world with a cry that could be heard across the valley. She had her mother's green eyes and her father's determined chin, and from the moment Jed held her, his heart expanded beyond what he thought possible. "She's perfect," he whispered, tears unashamed on his weathered cheeks. "Of course she is," Rachel replied weakly, but proudly. "Look what love built." As they sat together in their sun-flooded room, their daughter between them, the circle completed itself. From death to life, from isolation to community, from fear to love. Their journey had led them here, to this moment of perfect peace. Outside, the red rocks stood eternal, witness to all the human dramas played out in their shadow. They'd seen loss and violence, desperation and hope. Now they watched over a family born from the ashes of tragedy, proof that sometimes the hardest roads lead to the most beautiful destinations. "No regrets?" Jed asked, echoing his question from their wedding night. Rachel looked at him, at their daughter, at the home they'd built and the life they'd created. Through the windows, she could see riders approaching, neighbors coming to meet the baby, to celebrate new life. On the mantel sat the wooden sign William had carved, beside a photo of Martha that Jed had finally felt able to display, honoring the past while embracing the future. "No regrets," she said firmly. "Not one." And as little Martha's cries filled their home with the sound of life continuing, of love persevering, of hope winning against all odds, both parents knew it was true. They'd found their way through the storms to this place of sunshine and possibility. They were home. Thank you, dear listeners, for joining me on this journey through the wild frontier of the heart. I hope Rachel and Jed's story touched you as much as it did me. Where are you listening from today? Please share in the comments below. I'd love to know if you're enjoying these tales from a bustling city or perhaps your own quiet corner of the world. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more stories of love, redemption, and the indomitable human spirit. What did you think of our stubborn cowboy and his fierce widow? Share your thoughts. Your comments are what keep these stories alive. Until next time, partners.